to get started. I'm informed we have a strong quorum, not just a quorum. I'm not sure what that is, but I think that means that Mayor Ben's here. Okay.
This 15 works like a charm.
We got a few things to cover today, as we're all aware of. I want to get started. The first item on our agenda is approval of executive committee to approve the minutes from the February 10th meeting of this year.
Move approval.
Second by Mayor Ross, second by Councilmember Jones. If there's no corrections or additions, all in favor signify by saying yes.
Yes.
Oh, excuse me. Even in our little groups. Cast your votes.
I like the voice vote.
Okay. Voting is closed, and that passes unanimously. Do we have any requests for public comment? Okay. Amy? Oh, there it is. Okay.
I'm short.
Go ahead. Wherever you feel comfortable.
Chairman Roberts, honorable members of the Sandag Executive Committee, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Katie Hong, San Diego County Taxpayers Association. I'll be very brief because I know you have a lot to cover. I just wanted to share with the Executive Committee here at Sandag that given a lot of the discussion that's been happening, the San Diego County Taxpayers Association, I've informed Mr. Gallegos that this is, we're standing up a working group to look at oversight and offer recommendations on what might be the future of oversight and also what is working well within oversight at Sandag. And so I just wanted to inform you that this is an effort that's underway at the Taxpayers Association, and I welcome any input that members here might have. So thank you very much.
No, thank you, Henny. Thank you. That's the only speaker we have under public comment. So we'll go now to the reports. Kim's going to start with a review of the draft board agendas.
Okay. For your item 3A, your March 24th draft board business agenda, items 1 through 3 are your standard items: approval of meeting minutes, public comments, communications, member comments, and actions from the policy advisory committee. On the consent agenda, item 4, approval of proposed solicitations and contracts. We don't anticipate any this month, so that would be proposed for removal. Item 5 is FY 2016 Transnet Extension Ordinance Funding Eligibility Request. We have 2 requests going to the Transportation Committee next Friday, and we expect to bring this to your meeting following Friday for MTS and London Road. Item 6 is coming from a recommendation of the Planning Committee to recommend that the board adopt a resolution and accept some additional funding from the California Energy Commission for our plug-in electric vehicle work that we do. And then item 7 is a standard annual item, an update on the criminal justice research and clearinghouse work. Items 8 and 9 on your consent are your regular monthly reports summarizing delegated actions taken by the executive director, and then meetings and events attended on behalf of Sandag. And then moving to reports, pending your discussion today, we have included the same item, the independent examination commercial aid revenue estimate. We also at that time may include some additional information on the staff's work to date on the 7 parts, data accuracy and modeling and enforcement as well. And then item 11 is also on your agenda today. It's the preliminary FY 2018 program budget. Item 12, you heard conducted the first reading last month, and this is the second reading of an amendment to the Transit Extension Ordinance concerning terms of your independent taxpayer oversight committee members. Item 13, we've been carrying this item every month, and we are also meeting postpone this. This is the TIFIA loan for the Mid-Coast Corridor Transit Project. We are continuing to make progress with the TIFIA office. They are adjusting to a new administration, so we're working within their parameters and schedules. This one will be proposed to come off this agenda. Then item 14 is going to Transportation Committee next Friday. This are the funding recommendations for the Transnet grant program, as well as the federal funding for services for mobility services for seniors and individuals with disabilities. And then items 15, 16, and 17 are continued public comments, upcoming meetings, and adjournment. I'll move on to item 3B, which is your April 14th draft board policy agenda. There's public comments, communications, member comments, one is the greenhouse gas emissions reduction target setting process. At your board policy meeting, we're going to go into, you'll hear a discussion of that. We'll be asking for board action next month. Item 3 is the TIFIA item, which we included on this agenda, regards to the Midcoast project. And item 4 is the preliminary report on the RGIS organizational assessment that the steering group and the public safety committee has been working on for the past several months. And then finally, continue public comments up to the meeting.
Okay. Any questions or comments about future agendas?
Move approval.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Please cast your votes. Vote is closed. That passes unanimously. We'll leave item number 4, the draft fiscal year 2018 program budget. Andre? Tim?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members of the committee. Today's report summarizes the draft fiscal year 2018 program budget, which is included in detail as attachment 1 of this item. The agenda report and comments by Tim and I today will provide a brief overview of the draft fiscal year 2018 program budget, including the funding environment, highlights of new and ongoing activities for fiscal year 2018, and proposed staffing, resources, and employee programs. Overall, the proposed budget totals $1.3 billion, with a total budget of $44.7 million for the overall work program, or OWP. For the regional operations and services, $60.7 million, and projected capital expenditures of about $869.3 million out of a total funded program of $7.6 billion. What drives our ability to accomplish the goals and objectives described in these budget programs is ability to tap into and effectively use all available funding. Looking at our local funds, the recurring sources of transportation funds are the Sales Tax-Based Transportation Development Act, or TDA, and Transit, which are expected to grow by approximately 2.5% to 3% respectively. These two sources of sales tax combine to provide about half of the recurring transportation revenue that funds the annual OWP, and along with the transit bond proceeds, over half of the funding of the capital program. Our local toll road revenues are expected to increase by as much as 5% and are dedicated to State Route 125 and Interstate I-15 or 15 fast-track programs. Next are state and federal funding. There are many federal and state programs that provide funding commitments for SANDAG activities. Recently, the passage of Fixing America's Surface Transportation, or FAST-SAT, authorized a general increase of 2% per year in transportation funding. However, the appropriations so far have been flat. The remaining federal and state funds come from multi-year discretionary grants awarded on a competitive basis. SANDAG has done well by quickly responding to funding opportunities, and awards have been made included in the budget. Member assessments for SANDAG and criminal justice research are proposed to remain at current levels, and largest member assessments are proposed to remain steady, with other agencies subject to a modest 1% increase over the prior year. So overall, our total recurring revenue for fiscal year 2018 is expected to increase by approximately 3% over prior year. For SANDAG contingency reserves, this year we are proposing the use of $325,000 of the OWP contingency funds to incorporate the results of the household travel survey into the activity-based model. We're also projecting to deposit $200,000 into the contingency fund in fiscal year 2018, ending up with $8.12 million, which is 18% of the draft fiscal year 2018 OWP budget. The remaining contingency funds in operations, capital, and administration are comparable to fiscal year 2017 and are deemed sufficient to provide a safety net for those programs. Now that we have outlined the funding we have available, Tim will highlight some of the proposed fiscal year 2018 activities, which are listed beginning on page 4 of the report or page 17 of your tablets.
Thanks, Andre. So I'll go through the 3 major programs and focus on proposed new developments, and then talk about the notable activities that are planning to make significant progress in FY 2018. So starting with the proposals of the overall work program, technical services is embarking on new initiatives, which are actually starting now, prioritizing the data governance program that will establish data management standards and quality assurance procedures, as well as quality control for the entire suite of models. Separately, an independent review committee will validate these enhanced models. The ITS group is proposing to update the ITS strategic plan and the ITS architecture to accommodate the development of connected and autonomous vehicles. As you may have heard, San Diego has been selected to be one of 10 proving grounds, San Diego region, one of 10 proving grounds for autonomous vehicles. So the plan is to learn from that and incorporate that into the ITS architecture. And the San Diego website will be completely revamped with a fresh new look in FY 2018. For the planning team, continuing activities are implementation of San Diego Forward, which will be focusing on potential funding strategies for major corridor projects, regional transit-oriented development, and mobility hubs. Development of the next regional plan will also kick into high gear with an emphasis on emerging technologies and how they can enhance mobility. Also ramping up our menu of services provided to member agencies with new emphasis in TDM support services, energy roadmaps, climate planning, technical support, and the largest call for projects providing grants for smart growth and active transportation. Key new initiatives for the regional operations and services are the implementation of a regional tolling system for SR 125 and I-15, resulting in better customer service and a scalable consistency for our regional tolling facilities. Capital program. For this ongoing multi-year program, I want to point out some of the significant new construction activities planning to get underway, as well as projects to be completed in FY 2018. The multifaceted program of projects known as the Mid-Coast Light Rail Transit will see several new construction sites take off, including the San Diego River Bridge replacement, several new segments of double tracking, and building the Gilman Street Bridge over I-5. The other big program of projects is the North Coast Corridor, with new construction activities being the HOV lanes going north from Manchester Avenue, installation of 1.5 miles of rail double track, replacement of rail bridge, and installation of new signals at the San Diego Loudoun, and major lagoon restoration. It's also begin construction of new infrastructure on the shoulder of I-805 to support South Bay Rapid operations. Along significant progress on building 11 stations along the 21-mile corridor from Otay Mesa to downtown San Diego will also be making significant progress. In anticipation of that progress, I plan to purchase 16 new vehicles for that service. Completion of existing projects are also worth highlighting, including the completion of the I-5 Genesee Interchange and Widening Project, which replaces overcrossing, widens the freeway access ramps, and adds an auxiliary lane to I-5. We'll also be completing the construction of SR 76 East segment. The final segment of SR 76 corridor located between I-15 and I-5. This segment completes the 4-lane highway, including upgrades to the SR 76 and I-15 interchange. We'll also be completing the replacement of 4 aging timber trestle railroad bridges in the Los Penasquitos Lagoon. Attachment 2 describes the changes to the total capital project budget relative to the approved FY 2017. I just want to point out some of those changes and what causes changes from year to year. Typical examples are revision of the scope. An example of that is the North Coast Corridor, where we had $3 million for the design of an additional lane in the Carlsbad area. A second cause for changes are when we add a new phase to an existing project, like construction, and that happens when funding and cost estimates become available. Example of that is Pershing Drive Bikeway, where a budget increase of $10.6 million is proposed, and that's due to adding the construction phase of this project. Another reason is when a project is nearing completion. Example of this is SR 76 East, I just talked about where we're proposing a budget decrease of $3 million. And that's due to savings that we can now realize. In this case, it's due to the result of favorable bids. And generally, we're looking at 3 more years of intensive construction activities as we partner with Caltrans to push hard to complete as much of the funded Transcend early action programs as possible. After that, things taper off as future phases become continuous fund, securing new state and federal funding. The report has also a comprehensive list of FY 2017 expected accomplishments in attachment 3, helping to show the transition from this year to next year. Now Andre will discuss the staffing and benefits section of the budget and the next steps.
So there are no new positions that are proposed in this budget. There are 2 position reclassifications that are recommended, and these are detailed in attachment for the report. In preparing the draft fiscal year 2018 budget, the agency has reviewed various components of its compensation and performance management programs. Current employee salaries have been reviewed, and our compensation consultant gathered market data regarding salary increases that other organizations are providing to their employees. As a result of the data and analysis derived from this comprehensive program review, 3.5% merit bonus pool is proposed for fiscal year 2018 that will be used to support the Pay for Performance program. The total cost would be approximately $1.2 million. And finally, as part of the fiscal year 2017 budget last year, the board directed staff to establish a Section 115 trust as a means of saving for future pension costs. An initial contribution of $3.5 million will be made to the trust. This represented the total cost savings Sandag had realized over the past 4 years due to pension benefit changes that began in fiscal year 2013. We expect this trust will be set up with the funds and invested by the end of fiscal year 2017. The actual analysis performed last year also showed that after the initial deposit, annual $1 million contributions would enable Sandag to pay down the current accrued liability 15 years instead of 30 years, as projected by CalPERS, saving the agency approximately $29 million in pension costs. Thus, an additional $1 million contribution to the Section 115 trust is recommended as part of the fiscal year 2018 program budget. No other changes are recommended to the employee benefits program for fiscal year 2018. So our next steps. At the March 24th board meeting, there will be a more detailed presentation to the board on the highlights of the fiscal year 2018 program budget. At that meeting, I'll be joined by my fellow directors who will give presentations on how their departments help in accomplishing the goals set in the budget. On May 12th, the Executive Committee is scheduled to review the proposed final program budget, which will include comments received from the funding agencies, member agencies, and the public. Consistent with Sandag bylaws, the final program budget is scheduled for approval on May 26, 2017. With that in mind, today the Executive Committee is asked to 1. Authorize distribution of the draft fiscal year 2018 program budget to the funding agencies, and 2. To recommend to the Board of Directors we approve the draft fiscal year 2018 program budget and authorize distribution of the document to member agencies and other interested parties for their review. That concludes our presentation, and staff is available for any comments or questions you may have.
Questions, comments?
Yep, did you want to go?
Yeah, go ahead, Terry.
Andre, thank you, and thank you guys for putting this together. This is a huge amount of information, of course. Andre, what would be your recommendation, or what highlight would you say a board member at Sandag should be thinking about on this budget? What's the challenge coming forward out of this budget in 2018?
Well, I would say, overall right now, it's the funding that is coming in. I think we have pretty stable funding. I think there is a lot of unknowns out there as far as the market conditions. We're going to be doing a market report next to the board. And I think it's pretty much, the thought is that interest rates are going to be rising. The fact that there's going to be some growth coming in based on some of the stimulation that is expected from the federal government. So the hope is that things will continue progressing with our sales tax receipts and things will grow. We have seen over the last few years coming out of the recession, our rates of return on a sales tax were growing at about 4, 5, 6%. Now we're more in the 2 to 3% level. However, if there's a big stimulus package that we're expecting, then things could kind of go back to where we were before. So overall, I would say between 2017 to 2018, we have a very solid program budget. We'll continue to make progress on some of the major initiatives that we're doing, especially like Tim mentioned, the Mid-Coast Corridor project. So things are looking good for us.
Gary? Comment?
Yeah, I would add that, the budgets, conservative budgets, particularly on state and federal funds, they've assumed to be flat where they were last year. At the state level, they're debating a transportation package that you'll hear a little bit more about that, could know by April whether that happens. And in those packages being considered right now, there are new dollars for not only regional projects, but there's also new dollars that could come to local cities in our county. So, if those are successful, those would be areas that I would suggest to the committee are opportunities, right, to advance our project sooner. And then I think the other piece is both a potential opportunity and a challenge, and that's, there's a fair amount of talk at the federal level about some stimulus program, but the details are yet to be understood. So I think that's the opportunity. I think the challenge at the federal level is that we don't get caught in the crossfire between federal policy and state policy on some of these issues where discretionary dollars could be more of a challenge. And so that's an area that I would see as a challenge moving forward, because we have to comply with both, as they say, the golden rule. You play with other people's goals, you play by their rules, right? So we have to comply with both federal mandates and state mandates, and just trying to avoid getting caught in crossfire, I think, could be a challenge for us in the next year.
Given you the golden rule, at least 4 of us were at a metropolitan transit system meeting yesterday, and we were looking at the projections, especially the sales tax, and we need to follow the Sandag suggested. And I think it would be fair to say there was a strong feeling that maybe that was a little high in terms of what's being projected for sales tax, and we've seen it 2.5%, or down maybe 3.5%. Doesn't sound like big numbers, but in terms of percentage increase, significant. And I'm wondering, I know that the county has a lot to do with whatever we're projecting. So MTS can bring Sandag, and Sandag can bring the county, or can we come up with this?
Yeah, so
should we maybe be a little more conservative on that projection?
So typically what we do is we get together with the county in late November, December, along with the MTS and NCTD. We look at where we are and we kind of make projections. I think last year we were at 3.5%, and the numbers through December were closer to 2%, a little bit over 2%. So we took the conservative step for fiscal year 2018 of reducing from 3.5% to 2.5%. One of the things, as we went into December, we knew that the holiday sales were a little bit stronger, so we decided that even though we saw that things were slowing down, we still hadn't got through the December holiday sales, which actually in the next couple of weeks we'll see what those results are on the March numbers. So we're comfortable with the 2.5%. Again, we're agreed to with our economist and the county and the transit agencies. But certainly if we see that things are maybe slowing down, especially after we get the March numbers, we could come back and make a revision. But at this point, we're fairly comfortable with where we are at.
Okay, so it's possible this could get revised down a little bit?
Potentially.
And hopefully that would give the agencies that report in their budgets a chance to revise down also. Keep that in mind for the board members who struggle with this. I don't know who's on the county fence, some of you people maybe going through the same thing. I got Mary
Oh,
Desmond.
actually, I'm good. I have
Okay,
questions.
I thought I was on.
Thank you.
Okay.
Two questions. Staffing, we're not hiring. How our staffing is doing now with Proposition A is not passed. We're doing a lot less project. So, Gary, are we okay? Or
Yeah,
if
so-
we're gonna get the stimulus, state or federal, it's not gonna be before 2 or 3 years before we start getting any money.
So the business model that Sandag has used, I think, successfully over the years is that the core team here provides a lot of the project management piece. And so then we do rely on consultants to actually help us do the design and some of the construction management pieces of it. So that there allows us to scale up when there's opportunities, but allows us to contract when there's not opportunities, because if there's no opportunities, then we don't issue task orders for work that we're not doing, right? So that model, I think, has allowed us to be able to flex effectively, given the funding environment.
Second question is pension, of course. So we have set aside the pension reserve. And how much was that reserves that we are paying the long-term liabilities in dollar amount?
So the Section 115 trust, the board authorizes to put $3.5 million, right? And this year we're proposing another $1 million. That's fiscal year 2018 budget. And the study that we did showed that if we put $1 million per year over the next 15 years, we could shorten by almost a half as to when we kind of get fully funded. Again, that's assuming that investment rates of return are coming in as projected.
Right. And the second question is, did we decide to pay the long-term liability versus keeping the money in our reserves? How did we make this determination?
Yeah, so the determination was made by the board that we would hire a outside investment company, an actuarial to, well, not an actuarial, an investment manager to hold on to our funds in a trust. And let's say 5, 10, 15 years, whenever the board is comfortable, we could actually make that contribution to FERS to reduce the actuarial liability that we have.
So we're keeping the fund ourselves. We're not paying the check
Correct.
to CalPERS.
Correct. We're keeping the fund in a trust.
Okay, thank you.
And Mayor, I'd just add that kind of, hopefully, remind the committee members here that was an item that my recollection says the board had a strong opinion, instead of just giving it the FERS, that we would keep it in an irrevocable trust that could allow you guys to manage that rather than.
But one last question. Did we get the new projections when CalPERS lowered their investment from 7% to 7%? And how much difference did it make in our long-term liability?
So those changes, they reduced the discount rate from 7.5% to 7%. Those changes will happen over the next 3 years. And so we actually made internal calculations as to what we expect. At the height in 2021, when it slowed down to 7%, we projected it could be anywhere from 400,000 up to 900,000 additional contributions that we'd have to make.
Okay. So that's an additional almost 1,000.
It's a range, yes.
And the 7% is not really actual. The actual projection should be at the 4 and 5%. So I want us to keep that in mind. This unsustainable pension with CalPERS is going to grow and grow and grow, and it's going to put a burden on our family. But I'm glad we have a reserve now that we can manage that increase.
That should be known as the mayor of that fund.
Can I just follow up on that? What's the percentage of our pension funding right now? How much are we 72?
That's dropped down a little bit, down to approximately 69%. We're at 71% last year. I think the rate of return from FERS wasn't as great as we expected, so it's dropped down to 69%.
69% right now, okay.
How irrevocable is this irrevocable trust?
Actually, our RFP is out on the street right now, or it's going to be out on the street. The reason why it's taken us a little bit longer to do that is there's only 2 or 3 companies out there that have actually got a certificate from the IRS that allows them to do this kind of work. This is fairly new. And so once you put that money in that trust, you can't take it out except for pension funding.
Okay, so a future board could say, Airbed's not here, we can get away with this.
It's not gonna happen.
So it's, I mean, it is truly, once we place it in there, it can and only go to pension debt.
Correct.
Okay. And I think the hope is to do a little better in PERS and grow it, home grow it. Okay. Okay, any other questions? Okay, the recommendation is to approve this.
Move approval, one, to circulate the proposed draft budget, and two, to forward on to the board of directors.
Okay, I have a second over here also. So if there's no further comments, those of you who are able, please cast your votes. Nope. Voting is closed, and that's approved unanimously. And with that, we'll move on to item number 5, the independent examination of the Measure A revenue estimate. And let me just open this one. In February 24th meeting, the SANDAG Board of Directors unanimously approved moving forward with an independent examination of what occurred while our staff was in the process of building the revenue forecast used in Measure A. The board authorized this executive committee to bring recommendations as to who should conduct this examination based on recommendations from this board, and that I have received. You should have received from me on February 28th a notice soliciting any recommendations that you make, and also that went out to the full board and others not on the board. It was intended to anybody that had recommendations given before us. It was kind of a paucity of recommendations, to be honest. I thought with all the interest and maybe a lot of recommendations, but well, we can discuss those. That doesn't preclude us from doing. And for you to make any recommendations you have here today, I had a couple of people that recommended the Attorney General's office, State Attorney General, I'm presuming not the federal. I had Council Member Licio, who recommended a retired judge, an expert in forensic white-collar crime with expertise in email recovery, and she also recommended a civic leader or politician, namely Barry Jantz, who's been very active in East County politics. Also, I had a recommendation from Mayor Voss that former City Attorney Jan Goldsmith or John Rice, an attorney with white-collar crime and internal investigation expertise. What I'd like to do, I'm putting those out there so that you can see what I've seen to this point. And what I'd like to do is see if we can bring forward a recommendation at the end of today's meeting that we can go back to the board, somebody or some bodies that can do this in a timely fashion that will allow us to move forward and have some consensus that we have somebody that really is independent of us and from other political entanglements. So with that, I'll open it up for discussion.
Let me open part of the discussion, and we'll move on to all the other members. One of the concerns, naturally, that I've heard from everybody is a desire to do this in a very careful way, do this in an independent way, so that the board and the public can get some reassurance as to how come the projections were off, and was there any effort at all to hide those projections or overlook those projections. And so I think there's a desire to move forward in a quick manner, but in a thorough manner and in an independent manner. I'll throw one suggestion on the table, and there'll probably be other suggestions. But I think it would be very prudent for us to look in the community for some independent courtroom kind of expertise, such as 2 judges of some sort, a judge from each political spectrum, and ask them to do some sort of clear, precise analysis of what happened in an independent way, and maybe even have an ad hoc committee of this group to select those judges and come forward to the board with a recommendation for 2 people to do an independent effort. So that's one idea, and I would open that up for reactions and comments. And I'm just thinking that it's prudent to have people that we know in the community are thought of highly, are independent, and can move forward in a fairly quick way and not drag this on forever, so that we as an organization can come to some conclusions and take action if necessary, but completely understand what happened, give the public some reassurance, and then we can focus our attention on some of the more really major issues that are heading our way for the San Diego region. So that's just a thought.
Terry, you didn't say it, but Councilmember Alicio had recommended a retired judge. As you're talking about
people that have a strong reputation of fairness and objectivity, and are available to get to work right away and help us.
And I can't remember if we used, said 2 judges from different
Political spectrums.
political spectrums, which I think means political parties. Did I translate that?
Yes.
Okay, Mayor Voss?
First, I appreciate that we're discussing this so quickly after the last board meeting, and appreciate that we've got it on the draft board agenda to go back to the broader board later this month. I think that's terrific. Let me tell you how I came at this. I thought about the judge thing, but I'm not sure the typical judge has necessarily the investigative background to really dig in. That concerns me. So what I did was I called an old acquaintance of mine, actually an old neighbor who used to be head of the, he was a special agent in charge of the FBI's public corruption unit. Recently retired. I was kind of crossing my fingers that he would be available, because somebody like that in my mind would be perfect. Unfortunately, he recently took a job as head of security for the San Diego Padres. So he's got the cake job now, and we're still looking. I said, okay, somebody like you, who do you recommend? And without hesitation, he mentioned John Rice, who's a former federal prosecutor, had quite a career here in the San Diego office, now is a partner at Higgs Fletcher Mac. Couldn't speak highly enough about him. I personally spoke to another federal prosecutor, retired, asked, what do you think of John Rice? He said, absolutely terrific. Someone else mentioned the name Jan Goldsmith. I don't think Jan is apolitical in any sense. And so I would withdraw that recommendation. I can also mention on Mary Jan's, Christine Alicio's recommendation that he is not interested, and I don't think he'd be a good fit. Anyhow, John J. Rice, I have no idea what his political affiliation is. I don't care. He's got an impeccable record as somebody who's not afraid to follow the facts where they lead, ask the tough questions. Based on that, I would highly recommend him. I've spoken to him, and he said he would be very interested in taking it. That's all I've got.
I'll go right down the road.
Okay. Yeah, I was kind of in the middle of the road on this one, in that what I was thinking was the idea of, originally was brought up the idea of a retired judge, and so that was a nice idea, but I thought, we did a deal within our city that we do with our sales tax, where we have a panel, outside panel, and what we do it by category. So we have an individual that has city finance experience, someone who has economics experience, larger scale, and then we have someone that we see be more adversarial, San Diego Taxpayer Association. And you bring them together, and then you have them come out with something, so you have some different perspectives. So what I was thinking also was, including with retired judges, but that there be a panel, 2 or 3, but also include, in fact, federal prosecutors, I believe I'm saying that, and have a panel with both judges and federal prosecutor, 2 or 3 individuals total. That, therefore, you get a spectrum that would be able to look at this. And I'm sorry, I know the deal, a lot of people came out with the Attorney General. We've seen in the past that the Attorney General's office is a political office, and that has interjected itself very politically at the last minute on a number of things, and taken other people's letter and then put it on their letterhead. And so that I think we need something that would be, from all sides, would be able to be seen as objective. And so as I say, mine was kind of in the middle between the two of you, actually.
President Paul, Council President.
Thank you. Our city auditor, Eduardo Luna, wanted to do this. He was very excited to jump in and conduct this audit. But unfortunately, I think that was a conflict of interest, according to our city attorney. I know. Yeah, I know. But he's a great auditor. I just want to say that. But he did recommend someone else, and he asked me to recommend California State Auditor, the California State Auditor, whoever that is. But that's what he said is the person that he would recommend if he could not do it. And of course, he cannot do it. So you just have to research that. And I don't think my staff researched to the name of the California State Auditor, but I'm going to throw that title in. And like you said, one of my council members recommended the California Attorney General, but again, that
Soon
might be, that might not be recommended. Good recommendation either, but that's who our city auditor recommended, so I'm going to go with him.
Do you know who the state auditor is?
That's, my staff will look that up. He did not.
Okay.
As he's
give
Googling.
me-
Just- I know it's a well-known
I
person,
know
but-
the Google does.
He's going to Google the name, because I just got this information
And is that
late
an
last
elective
night.
office or appointed office?
And that is what he's going to give me the information, as soon as he,
Elaine Howell.
Elaine Howell.
Yeah.
And is that his elected?
They're I'm trying to figure. They're independent from the governor's office and the legislative office.
Okay, we can come back.
Yes, and that is a female. Okay, that's a female too. Just
I see any other hands here.
Well, I'm falling on the middle, like so many here. To me, the most important thing is to be done in a timely manner. The public is crying for blood, and the longer this goes on, the worse that's going to get. So a panel of judges, the more cooks you get involved in this, the worse it gets. So I think that Mayor Voss's recommendation with Mr. Rice, I put my glasses on, Mr. Rice, is probably the best of the suggestions. He has a history of being able to investigate and of having some forensic abilities. He's pretty apolitical. I don't think anybody knows what his political affiliations are. Obviously, he knows the town because he's been here. So that would be where I would want to go. I think that's the most apolitical choice we have before us of all of them. Number one. Number two, in terms of oversight, it's not just the investigator that's important here, it's the questions that we ask. Just like a survey. You get any outcome you want if you ask the right questions. So and I think I mentioned this to you in my email to you, I think that we should take the executive board, pare it down to the primaries, and since your integrity is a quick question, Mayor, Mr. Roberts, and nothing on you, it's just a matter of trying to keep that independence. Perhaps you should step aside from chairing that ad hoc committee, and so that it's independent. Then let the primaries on the executive board craft the questions that we're going to ask in a public way, so that the public has input onto that, and then let that kind of determine where the independent investigator goes from there. Now, obviously, he's going to have his list of things that he thinks should be done, but I think that there needs to be some input from the public and from the executive board. But those are my recommendations.
Yeah. Just so if you've read all the press, your integrity is under question too.
Pardon me?
Your integrity is under question too.
Yeah, I get that as well. Yeah.
Okay. So don't think it's just me.
Oh no, I get it.
Okay. I mean, I've read that all of you knew about this.
Spread the wealth around.
Yeah. So you should. I don't feel any more uncomfortable than you should feel.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the alternative is to have somebody from the outside, but I don't.
Well, we can go outside.
Yeah,
at
I mean,
some
that's
point.
right.
You got to ignore sometimes and make a decision.
All right, I get it.
Okay. Mayor Mendo.
Yeah, did you say this guy Rice has formed his own private investigation company now?
No, he's a partner at Higgs Fletcher Mac.
Okay, well, my recommendation is that you just allow that company, that partnership, do the investigation. If you bring in a state auditor and pair them up, then there's going to be a question continuously, who's in charge? And there's going to be, and I can tell you right now that the state auditor's office is going to say they're in charge because that's their job, is to investigate public agencies and things like that. But I think that this is probably the most independent that you could get in allowing this firm to handle the investigation. They probably have all the right staff to do that, and they probably also have the ability to craft some very interesting questions that I don't even think the executive board could think of. So it's true. So, and I agree though that anybody that's on this board of directors is being looked at as what was your part in any of this. So to say that any one of the executive board members should even be involved, I don't think they should be. I think you go with your investigator and let them see what comes out at the end of the day.
Just kind of quickly, I think timing is of the essence, to get this moving. And from what I've heard so far, to be honest with him, this Mayor Minto here, I kind of agree with that, going with the firm, because if you pick one individual, it's always going to be some sort of a controversy if they're at a party or not. I think the suggestion of a couple of judges, I mean, I'd only want one report, not two reports from any, if there's 2 or 3 people on a panel. You just got to make sure there's only one report so we don't get conflicting issues. But, a firm, and I'm not familiar with this firm at all. It might have to be some more investigation or, I guess, more of a vetting of whoever it is we hire. But I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
I just want to make sure you go around the room.
I did.
Okay.
Okay.
I agree with my colleagues. I do oppose any state representative, the Attorney General got involved in our lawsuit with the state, and he took sides. So I don't think he is the right person to get involved in it. I would leave the state alone because we have a relationship with them, we have funding with them, and I think an independent organization would be good. The Taxpayers Association would be an ideal organization to do that, but they did support Proposition A, so that's a little bit of a conflict of interest. Judge Price is a good recommendations, and I agree with Jim that we should not craft any questions or get involved. Let them do it and let us know. And I think we need to move quickly. We mentioned criminal investigations. We're not getting to any conclusion. We're just, one question for me. Was there any intent to hide this information from the board and the public? Period. That's the question that has to be answered. And we need to move on. We have a lot of work ahead of us, and I hope it will be done quickly.
Councilman Zapp.
Thank you. Just my 2 cents, non-voting member, but in listening to the discussion and reading through the bios, I've come down thinking that Mr. Rice is probably the best choice in this with that investigative experience in the law firm, and just the comments that Jerry, John, and Steve have all made, I agree with those. It seems to be, this has to be as apolitical as possible, and I think this is probably the gentleman who's the most apolitical.
If I could, I don't know Mr. Rice.
Either do I. This is why I like it.
Yeah. But I think the first thing we're going to hear from him is about 3 or 4 other major law firms here. I know Higgs, Fletcher, and Mack, and if anything, I may even have a conflict. Because years ago I sponsored, Mr. Higgs passed away, basically a recognition for him at the courthouse. They're a very good firm. What we probably should do is solicit for a short list, highly qualified firms here and let them give us a proposal. I'd like to see what the costs might be on something like this, so we can judge. I don't want to about $8,000 an hour, no matter how good they are. I think there are probably people in each of the major firms that do this work, and rather than just hear it the first time we heard something, accepting the name. I think we can have a subcommittee that can look through this, and I don't need to be on that, but I'd rather not. And we can decide which of you want to participate in that, and maybe go through a quick. We can solicit something real quick on this.
Ask maybe Lauren or Cote or Director of Administration where our contracts.
As far as the process, we have actually already started putting some ideas together with respect to a range. So if it's a state employee, et cetera, that would be the cheapest. And then a law firm might be on the higher end. Or we have, we're ready to go out and reach out to anyone that you're interested in proposals at this point. So I would think it would take more than a week or 2 to get back to you on what we're funding.
Well, we could have them do something, come back to this, or it's come to a subcommittee. Either way, it's just as quick. But I think this could all be done in 2 weeks, whenever our next meeting is.
Sure. One thing I want to be on record. I don't care what the cost is. We've got to pay $1,000 an hour to get a clean bill of health or to follow the facts, then I'm all for it. It's a small cost to pay, a small price to pay to reestablish our credibility. Once we select, I just wanted to throw another idea in working with Vice Chair Sanat on the Burgess Committee. We had the services of, and I'm not sure of her relationship to Sandag, Diane Item, if she's an employee now or a special contractor. I would like to have somebody like that involved. Well, not somebody like that. I think Diane would be perfect to be the interface between whoever the investigator is, because she knows Sandag inside and out, very thorough. And yes, it would add some cost, certainly, but I was very impressed with her ability to, her understanding of Sandag inside and out, and ability to connect us where we needed to be connected. So just an additional suggestion. But I still remain firmly behind John Rice, Higgs, Fletcher, Mack. But if we need to put out a mini RFP to a couple law firms, I can certainly look at that.
Mr. Chair, just for your information, we are currently under contract with a law firm that takes Fletcher and Mack as part of our on-call outside counsel program. I believe right now that's in areas of insurance, condemnation, and intellectual property. But like they're undertaking here, ultimately their duty under those contracts is to render advice to you ultimately as the client. And I don't know that that would necessarily present a conflict of interest, but it's something you might be aware of.
What other firms?
We're probably under contract with 15 firms. We have.
I was hoping you'd say 3.
We try to have them ready so we can move quickly when an issue arises.
Well, I wonder if we can identify maybe who has, in addition, it's such a, you know, a positive reputation for doing the kind of investigation.
I don't believe Mr. Rice has been identified under his.
No, I know that, but just because we haven't had a need for those kinds of services. But I'm sure there's a whole lot of attorneys within that firm and other firms that we haven't identified for them, whatever their key area of expertise is. But could we identify a small number of firms off of your master list that you have reason to believe have excellent investigative capabilities?
We could. That was not the scope of our initial, when we went out for request for qualifications. We didn't ask them for that information, but we could go out again.
I mean, if you just call them on the phone and have a short discussion and try to identify. I think if we could bring back, all due respect to Mr. Rice, who you don't know and I don't know, but I still think I'd like to see proposals from 3 of them.
Sure, and if we do that, really, that's a new procurement, since that wasn't in the scope of our old procurement, so we're not necessarily limited to those firms that we currently have under contract. Firms respond to the areas that we ask them.
I'm just trying to narrow this down for you, John. If there is some firm that's out there that is well known for this kind of work, if that's not currently on our procurement list, I don't have a problem including them in the mix. In fact, that may be a way to ask, just as the mayor asked for a recommendation, maybe you ask for a couple of recommendations and see what else is out there, and then we can make a decision going forward.
I wonder if that conversation shouldn't be had by a subcommittee, so to speak. I'm a little uncomfortable with Sandag's general counsel asking questions, who's best equipped to investigate Sandag, where at least there's some insulation between board members and the process. So I think that itself speaks to, let's have a subcommittee, and I would be happy to serve on that. But let's get her done.
Yes, and I would like to see some timelines set in here so that we would like to bring this to the board and make a recommendation to the board at the April whatever meeting, so that we have, so when the solicitation goes out, whoever responds to it knows the timelines, and that we would like to have this done by July, whatever. But I think that needs to be in there so that we have a plan moving forward and they know what it is we're trying to accomplish in a timely manner. Because if you leave it open-ended, it's going to stay open-ended. You got to nail it. I think I would like to see that come from this committee to say,
well,
here's when we want to present this to the board.
I think part of it is we're going to need the input from whoever we would select for this, for them to tell us.
But how about, we want to make the recommendation of who it is to the board, at least that portion.
Yeah, no question about that, but I think then they can help us determine, okay, what is it going to take? How many hours you got to get?
Well, I think we could give them some suggestions that we'd like it done by.
You could.
Because otherwise it can go too.
Yeah, I just, giving them a suggestion and putting that in as a hard timeline without their input. But I think as soon as we get that input, we could be able to firm up and show what the future meetings will be.
Okay.
I think we all want to get through this as quick as possible.
I just would like to see that part.
The one advantage of having an independent council, you know, if we have to go out and find retired judges, you got to find somebody who's got the schedule to do this. And that was, you know, I like the notion of retired judges. Retired judges that haven't been visibly active in political stuff. I like, you know, there's a lot of very bright people around, some of whom know how to do investigation. But I think with a firm, you're going to have a commitment. Let's roll through this a little quicker.
That's why I think I kind of like the firm, because you get two retired judges, and they're, you know, to come up with one report is going to be difficult, I think. Especially if they don't even know each other and haven't worked together before. I've done it.
Okay. Just one more comment, Chair. You can have two more comments.
Yes, I do have a concern with a law firm with outside counsel who has financial interest with Sandak. I think, you know, any firm, any law firm who's doing business with Sandak or has done business with Sandak, there's a financial interest in there. I don't think they should be included in the mix. That's my opinion.
That's kind of hard.
Yeah, it's like asking, well, you know, when you pick a jury, you know, we all are asked if we can be impartial. And so we have to set things aside, and I feel like this is the same thing. Just about every big law firm out there will have had some.
I think there's going to be a difference too with, you know, Biggs Fletcher Mac might have one level and, you know, somebody have another look. I don't think it should necessarily preclude them, but it deserves a closer look.
I think it deserves a closer look, and if I may, I don't know if I missed this. In putting out, like you said, a little mini RFP, I mean, an investigation, I've seen this before, you know, can get into the minutia and take forever. And I think that really there needs to be some kind of threshold and, you know, how many hours at what, you know, minutia, because we can't leave it just open-ended.
You know, that's why we want to work with that person and try to establish a framework. Remember, it comes to a point where unless we go to China to find something.
No, let's stay here.
You know, you've got to assume at some level that somebody on this planet has an integrity.
And they will be able to advise us as well.
Yeah, so I don't want to exclude Biggs Fletcher
Okay.
or anybody else. I mean, it's just, we're getting too paranoid on this, okay? I'm willing to take, I want somebody to go in that will give you the comfort and give everybody around this board comfort. They've done a very thorough job. They've looked at this thing. They come back, here's the conclusion, X, Y, and Z, and let's move on whatever that is, okay?
But it would also give the public
That's
that's
no
more
question
so
about it.
than anything.
No question about it. But I think the first thing, though, all of you are going to be paying intense attention to this, and you're going to have scrutinized this in detail and want you to be satisfied at the end of this.
But I think the other thing is moving on this thing in a very timely fashion. Because, let's just be honest, I mean, this is being tried in the media. And, you know, and if you wait too long down the road, it's no longer going to have the media attention. So, I mean, that's part of the reality also. And so, and this is getting to be a trend throughout the county.
We're all in agreement on that. I don't sense that anybody is saying, you know, we want them to do a thorough job, but we want to do it very quickly. Mayor Meadow down there, yeah.
I can tell you that after having done thousands of criminal investigations, that if you hire a firm that has a reputable investigator with them, if they find something that's been done illegally, they're going to go after it like there's no tomorrow, because that's what they do. That is what excites them. And so, unless there's an absolute conflict of interest with this other company, I can tell you right now, they're going to go after it, because that is what validates their integrity also.
Their reputation.
That's right. And, you know what, I think the public, because I've talked to a lot of people, and they want this done also. And just the fact that we're looking into it and we're willing to hire a private investigator gives them a sense that we're not trying to cover things up. And if they find something like that, though, and it comes out and people are named, well, that's what happens. And it's like a spider web sometimes when you do those investigations. And you're right, they get down into the minutia, but who knows, sometimes that's where the truth lies. But your investigator is going to find that out very quickly, very quickly. So I don't think this is going to be a real long investigation.
If it's okay Okay, I'd like to try to summarize a little bit of what I think I'm hearing. I'm hearing that generally there is a desire to go for a investigative law firm to move forward as quickly as possible. We may have to take a couple of steps to solicit interest from a couple of firms, but within a 2-week time frame, we can try to get that turned around. There's a desire for the primaries or the executive committee to have a chance to input possible questions. I don't know if that's still up. And there's also some desire for a subcommittee. Is that correct? I was still some sort of a subcommittee that could help move the process along faster than we sitting as an executive committee could do on our own. Is that generally?
I would agree with all of that, except for this committee should have nothing to do with defining questions.
Okay.
We simply, the questions are defined. Who,
Let,
what, when, where, why.
let the investigator
Let
do
the
his
investigator do
Okay,
that.
good.
If it's appropriate, I would make a motion that we create a subcommittee of 3 to work through the mini RFP and come back to the full executive committee at the next meeting with a recommendation with the goal in mind to immediately go at the earliest opportunity after that to the full board, for the full board to sign off on it and get this in motion.
Okay. Mayor Voss would like to serve. Vice Chair Sanat would like to serve. President
Myrtle, want to join us?
You'd bring great balance to this group. Could you do this? We'll do it quickly for you.
Thank you.
Would you do this for a favor, please?
And it can fit in balance.
I just have a question then. Would that firm come to this committee for an interview? Do we meet him? What do you, and I'm just throwing that out there. I don't know what you're thinking on a process.
Let them go through the credentials and come back with a recommendation. And at that time, if they come
Just
back with
trying to get a
several
comfort level of saying yes.
I
to that.
want them
I don't know
here
what that
to
is.
answer your questions.
I think we're going to know a lot once we do our MRFP, mini RFP. I think we'll have a lot of answers, and if we come to the executive committee with that recommendation and the executive committee still isn't comfortable based on that RFP, then we could certainly have
I
a
guess could you
standby.
bring credentials or bring, whatever it is,
Absolutely.
so that we have a,
Yeah.
because if it's somebody I have never heard of or know of, then
You'll
it's-
know, you'll be fully informed.
Yeah, so we all have a comfort level of it.
Okay.
Thank you.
The subcommittee is not to be involved in the process, but to coordinate the effort between the company
To
and
select.
the executive.
To bring back a recommendation.
Bring back that
Okay?
Chairman, one clarification and a question more for the executive committee. Mayor Voss mentioned using somebody like a Diane Idom. She
Yeah.
would be helpful. I think her background is, she used to work for us, but her background's in audits, right? And so
Yeah, and that would be down the road once we,
down the road,
Just
not right now.
not right now.
Okay.
They're going to need some assistance, and I think that was a good suggestion. Okay,
I think we need a second.
a second to the motion? Okay, I have Councilmember Jones here for the second. Okay, we have a motion and second. There's no further discussion. Please cast your votes. The voting is closed, and that's approved unanimously. Thank you. Our committee will work tirelessly to get this back here. Okay.
Take a deep breath.
With that, we have one more discussion item, the legislative status report. Robin's going to give that to us. And
Hi everyone.
She will
Do we need to
self-edit.
take a stretch? Alright, I'm here to provide you with your state legislative update. Quite a few developments to bring you from Sacramento. As you may recall, our advocates from Sacramento, Brooks and Kirk, were at our last meeting at the Verona retreat to talk to you about some of the transportation funding proposals that are currently under consideration. Senate Bill 1 and Assembly Bill 1, introduced by Senator Bell and Assemblymember Frazier, the respective chairs of the transportation committees, continue to lead the conversations around transportation funding at the state level. Senate Bill 1 just passed out of its third policy committee this week, so we'll next head to the Senate Appropriations Committee. In the meantime, the Republicans and the governor have also introduced their own transportation funding proposals. While Senate Bill 1 and Assembly Bill 1 both provide about $6 billion on an annual basis through the standard mix of diesel and gas tax increases, cap-and-trade funding, and registration fees, the Republican proposal will alternatively provide about $4.3 billion on an annual basis, mainly through the diversion of existing taxes from the general fund to transportation.
Is that 496?
It is, yes, 8496, and that's in your report as well. The Republican proposal also includes the immediate repayment of loan and late fee repayments and some backfilling with cap-and-trade funds. Alternatively, the governor's proposal will provide about $4.3 billion a year through a mixture of the two proposals that I just outlined. His also includes the diesel and gas tax increases, although at a lower level than SB and AB1 include, but he also has cap-and-trade loan repayments as well as a new vehicle registration fee. SB1, AB496, and the governor's proposal all include state and local funding, as Barry was mentioning earlier, as well as transit and various Caltrans reforms and overall accountability provisions. That being said, the governor's proposal does include several new funding streams that could benefit San Diego in particular. It has about $250 million for self-help counties, of which San Diego is one, another $250 million for high-priority freight corridors, as well as a new congested corridors program that specifically cites the North Coast Corridor Program as an example of a project that should get funding through that new program. I know it seems like we've been talking about these transportation proposals for years now, and that's because we have. The Transportation Special Session first convened in 2015. That being said, legislative leadership has said that if we are to reach a deal, it's going to happen by April 6th. So hopefully we will know sooner rather than later if they're able to reach some sort of consensus around the state funding. I would like to note, however, that because each of the proposals include cap-and-trade in some capacity, recent auctions don't bode well for this funding stream. The governor's transportation trailer bill included about $2.2 billion in expenditures for cap-and-trade, and that counts on about $500 to $600 million at each quarterly auction coming in. However, the last 3 out of 4 auctions have brought in closer to $8 to $10 million. So some of that is attributed to current pending litigation under consideration by the State Appeals Court. In addition, lawmakers are currently debating what should happen past 2020 with the cap-and-trade program. That being said, cap-and-trade has been an important source of funding for several of our major transit projects here in San Diego, and it's unclear what a replacement program may mean for Sandag or the region as a whole, so we'll continue to keep a close eye on those developments. In addition to policy developments, a lot has been happening as far as legislation. February 17th was the deadline. This is the first year of a new 2-year legislative session, so legislators were very busy introducing bills, more than 2,600 bills to be exact. And so working with our advocates in Sacramento, we've identified nearly 300 bills that fall within the general purview of the Sandag legislative program, meaning they touch on or relate to one of the priorities that the executive committee and the board of directors has identified as a priority for the agency this year. Typically, we would bring these bills to the committee as they mature and move through the process. However, this year is a bit different as we've already identified several bills that could significantly impact kind of the core of what Sandag does. Well, most of the bills that we typically monitor and the committee takes action on usually have statewide application. These bills in particular currently propose to alter the overall structure or governance and or taxing authorities of Sandag as the Metropolitan Planning Organization or the Regional Transportation Commission for San Diego. These bills are outlined in your report starting on page 545, and I'll run through some of those, but just as a reminder, Sandag was statutorily established, meaning our membership and our governance structure, among other elements, are prescribed under California law. Similarly, our taxing authority is authorized by statute specific to Sandag. And that's why some of these bills are so important, and we want to make sure you're aware of them. So starting with Assembly Bill 1324, one of the newest members of our legislative delegation, Todd Floria, has introduced a bill that would allow metropolitan planning organizations to impose, increase, or extend tax measures on a sub-regional basis. As you know, Sandag, as the RTT, is currently authorized to impose tax measures for the entirety of the incorporated and unincorporated territory of San Diego. Therefore, passage of this legislation would substantively impact our current authorities by allowing us to impose sub-regional or region-wide tax measures instead. Also related to this taxing authority, 2 constitutional amendments have been introduced, Senate Constitutional Amendment 6 and Assembly Constitutional Amendment 4. Both of these bills would lower the required voter threshold from the 2/3 to 55%. SCA 6 is related to taxes for transportation purposes, and ACA 4 is related to public infrastructure and affordable housing taxes. In addition, ACA 4 would also impose some new requirements and limitations on SANDAG as the RTC, compared to our current requirements and practices. In particular, it would exclude us from using tax revenues for SANDAG salaries and other SANDAG operating expenses, and require certification that alternative funding streams have been explored for any projects that are to be funded by the tax. In addition, while SANDAG does not have authority to impose a tax for affordable housing, nor do we construct affordable housing as part of our responsibilities, ACA 4 does directly tie to one of the major regional goals that are included in San Diego Core, the regional plan, to provide affordable housing to people of all income levels in the county. Now, those who follow state legislation know that measures like these are not new. We typically see something introduced along these lines every year. That being said, given the increasing focus on trying to find new sources of transportation funding and the increasing trend for local jurisdictions to try to find their own funding given inaction at the state and federal level so far, these measures may start to be in steam this year. Should something like this pass, it would open the door for SANDAG to pursue cleanup legislation to similarly lower our current 2/3 voter required threshold to 55% as well. Next up on the list, we have Assembly Bill 805, which was introduced by Assembly Member Lorena Gonzalez-Fletcher. AB 805 is currently a spot bill, which means at this point we don't know exactly what the bill intends to do or will ultimately achieve. Spot bills are basically placeholders, and so because legislators are required to introduce legislation by a certain deadline, they'll introduce a spot bill, which essentially amends a code section in a non-substantive way so that later on they have a germane vehicle to then amend it to include substance should they decide to do so. As shown on page 578 on your iPads, the code section referenced in AB 805, however, is SANDAG's establishing statute. So based on that and some statements that have been made to the press, it appears that the intent of the bill could be to somehow alter the governance structure or membership of the SANDAG Board of Directors. Because we're at the beginning of a 2-year term, it's not clear how quickly this bill may move, and it hasn't been referred to a committee yet. The last bill outlined in your report is Senate Bill 30 by Senator Loudoun. This bill, among other provisions, would require that any federally funded infrastructure project along the California-Mexico border that reaches $1 billion threshold has to go to a statewide vote. As you know, SANDAG, in partnership with Caltrans, is currently and continues to complete significant infrastructure-related improvements along the border, utilizing both state and federal funds. In particular, State Route 11, the new road leading up to the future Otay Mesa East Port of Entry, has utilized federal funding and was awarded nearly $50 million in federal Fast Lane grant funds last year. While we haven't reached the $1 billion threshold for Otay Mesa East, depending on the definition of a project area under the bill, passage of SB 30 could substantially impact the ability of SANDAG to carry out this project as well as other infrastructure improvements along the border. I also did just want to mention, if I may, there's 2 other bills that are related to Otay Mesa East and some of our work along the border. Senate Bill 1, the transportation bill I mentioned earlier, as well as Senate Bill 4, which is a goods movement bill by Senator Mendoza. Both direct $150 million in federal freight formula funds to infrastructure improvements along the California-Mexico border. This is a result of significant negotiations that SANDAG participated in on a statewide level last fall. And so we're keeping an eye on this to see if we're able to direct this funding to one of the state and the region's top priorities of Otay Mesa East. As you know, SANDAG regularly works with community stakeholders, our San Diego legislative delegation, and statewide coalitions to advance the annual legislative program that's approved by the Board of Directors. In addition, we currently utilize Ellison Wilson Advocacy in Sacramento to advocate on behalf of our routine legislative priorities. That being said, as I mentioned, several of the bills that I've outlined today do get at the core of what SANDAG is and does. And the technical and complex nature of these bills will likely require a deeper level of attention and workload. Given the expansive reach and potential of the various legislation to impact SANDAG, it's likely that we're going to need to work with a much broader audience this year going forward and stakeholders to ensure that the legislative goals and priorities of SANDAG are advanced and preserved. So that being said, we just wanted to make sure that the executive committee is definitely aware of things that are going on in Sacramento and are very much interested to hear your feedback on how we should proceed going forward on these bills.
Just have a couple of questions. questions. You said the Senate Constitutional Amendment 6 and Assembly Constitutional Amendment 4 would amend to the voting threshold for transportation projects to 55%. Then did you, I wasn't sure if I caught it right or not, would that also apply to Sandag measures put forward?
So yes and no. It would be a statewide lowering, but because Sandag has its own specific statute that authorizes us to do tax measures, we'd have to do some cleanup legislation as well.
So we'd have to have legislation if we wanted to go that same path to match that. Okay, so we're not under that umbrella. Then I think you mentioned under the governor's, budget, proposed budget, congestion management dollars for the North Coast Corridor. What's the where is the North Coast Corridor specifically?
78.
Well, I don't know that. I don't know that. So I want to define it. So I want to find out what that is.
The legislative language doesn't define it, but the North Coast Corridor program for Sandag is from La Jolla to Oceanside.
Okay, so the 5.
And low sand improvements as well.
The corridor includes all the transportation within that.
From La Jolla to Oceanside, but I'm thinking, does it go east as well, or is that just a northern shot?
Your lobbying effort will help it to go east too.
Okay, well, I'm just curious. I want to see. I'm glad for anything, but I wanted to define and get more definition of that. Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Zapp.
Thank you. A question on all those in the beginning, all those projections you threw out with, it'll this much money and that much money. Who makes those projections? Is it the DOF?
The DOF and the LAO, the Legislative Analyst Office. And then the League of California Cities also does a breakdown of how much each local jurisdiction would receive.
So have they, is that included in what you were talking about?
The top level numbers, yes.
Okay, because they've been wildly off on all kinds of things, like Prop 47. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I mean, we're going to save $200 million a year, get dispersed to all the cities, and I was up there a couple of weeks ago with the chamber, and it's 110 for the entire state over a 3-year period. And so, I don't know, whenever they have these projections, I say everyone take it with a grain of salt, cut it in half, and hope it even gets there. But anyway, if it's the DOF and some of these other entities. And it looks like, I was just wondering if it was the same one that's been wildly off before. And since it is, I think we should be suspect. You want to introduce Assemblymember Gonzalez Fletcher. This looks like, you said we really don't know what's in it, but in looking at it, it looks like this is the one that I've heard is trying to reorganize the board of Sandag.
The voting pattern.
So, so we do kind of know what it is, and I think obviously that's one, since it's looking like it's specifically to try and rearrange the governance of this board for whatever reason, that's one that I think we should keep a close eye on.
Believe me, we will keep a close eye.
I'm just saying, I think they tried it with Civic. She did the same thing for Civic.
Yeah, you would like it when somebody's going to put up bills with, like, Assemblymember Gloria has done. Try to be clear, here's what I would like to see. We've been able to meet with them and talk to them about these bills. We're supportive. We're able to create some area where we can get things approved and tailor those to the regional needs. There's 2 things that jumped out from Alvin's report. One was, I can't remember the exact number. I thought I heard 2,000-something bills were introduced.
Yes.
Assuming they worked Monday through Friday. That's like 10 a day. 10 bills a day. Nobody can keep track of that.
They doubled the number that was allowed for each legislature to introduce this year.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. But that's the first thing. The second thing, just to put some perspective, one of the major things that's going on, and there's a lot of disinformation about them, and putting something I've read in the press recently. And it's about cap and trade. You might have read an editorial recently about how it's failed and it needs to be redone. So just so you know, cap and trade's been a big success in what it was supposed to do, and that's reduce emissions. Okay? A global, remember we're saving the planet? In doing that, though, what has happened, the companies are making changes, they're doing things, and the fines that the government, as they call them fines as opposed to taxes, so they can get approved. But what has happened is the companies don't have to sign all of these basically allowances that the state was forcing them because they're making changes, because they're meeting the requirements. And all of a sudden now, the amount of money that the California government was getting, there's 500 firms that are on this list that are regulated under cap and trade. Not everybody, it's a specific group of firms that are largely refineries and electrical producers and things like that. And they're reducing their emissions, and all of a sudden they don't need to buy all of, these, in effect, these exemptions. So the money's gone down. And then I read, well, the program's failed. The program hasn't failed. That's exactly what it was designed to do. What it's failed in
To raise money.
is oiling this slush fund of things that they wanted to be done in addition, but nothing to with saving the planet. It's now come down to how do we get money to our constituents so that they think we're wonderful. So it's just so you'll know if you read things about that. You're going to be reading a lot because the state's going to want to renew at a different level a program that's shown itself to be very effective. So in any event, I can't help but editorializing a little bit. Mayor Beck?
A few questions. Lowering the tax threshold 55% would require two-thirds of the Assembly and the Senate.
Yes, exactly, and then it would still need to go to a statewide ballot.
And
Yeah.
two-thirds.
Yes, for 50 plus.
There's another also Assemblyman bill by Chu, I think, to impose prevailing wages on building homes. That would add $55 a square foot to build homes. That has some relevance to our regional planning as well. And what concerns me is AB 805. This is just simply an attempt to break down these great organizations. We have been working together, moving forward, and now they want to change the voting pattern to favor one party against the other. I hope this executive committee and the board would oppose this. Let's continue to work together on a nonpartisan basis and oppose that. That's Assemblywoman Gonzalez. I hope we can talk to our friend, Todd Gloria. He understands how Sandag works. I hope he can influence to stop that attempt to impose a certain voting pattern on Sandag.
In fact, we did. Something Gloria, the fact is he doesn't, nor does anybody else in the legislature know what's going to be in this bill. I mean, it's their attempt behind it. Last minute when we put it out. I think one of the things we're going to have to do, though, to be in a position to respond is to enhance lobbying effort, anticipation of something.
I hope that's it.
So we'll be, there's probably a point where we want to bring that back.
Yeah, it could. I mean, we went through these before, back with Steve Peace with 1703, and then also with Christine Keogh. And, I think we need to be cognizant of what is going to be involved. It is a huge amount of time. It's a huge amount of effort dealing with these. It just, a vote here of this board does not control any of that. And so I know back during the 1703, I mean, there was a number of times we were making 2 and 3 trips a week to Sacramento. And then we were constantly in meetings here, dealing with people. A lot of it's education, because a lot of people from 500 miles away, all they get is, there's little bits of information that they get from different factions or whatever, and a lot of it is out of context. A lot of it is very biased and everything else. And so you end up having to deal with a whole lot of different individuals, and it's very time consumptive. And so, this is something, it's not just us taking a vote here and saying, let's oppose something.
Right.
It's going to be a lot of education of ourselves, realizing what all that makes this work and what doesn't, you know, what works and what doesn't, what are within our control, what is not, how do we communicate that? And it's because it's amazing, you hate to say it, but it's amazing when you go to Sacramento and when you talk to people, a lot of them, they are staff-driven, they are also driven by just reports that they, you know, somebody sends them a letter, and that's the information that they have. We have to be as diligent to make sure that we give our side of the story also, and get that across. It's as I say, very time consumptive, very intensive, and but it's something that if we believe that this board is doing the right thing, then we need to be committed to. And I'll just tell you, I know there's always within a home base, you always have this deal of, well, an organization isn't working. But in my opportunity to work with the Sandags throughout California and throughout the United States, I can tell you, whenever I deal with them, they all say the same thing. And it's this little saying, you know, when we grow up, we want to be Sandag. You know, everyone thinks that there's something terribly wrong with Sandag. They tell you it's still the best game out there.
Let me,
Best game out there.
if I could recommend, in anticipation of something that will come at the last minute, I was thinking we could authorize Gary to work with our Sacramento team to see what, if anything, needs to be augmented in anticipation, so that we're kind of, we're teed up for this.
Mm-hmm.
The very worst thing, I think, is to stop the regional cooperation. All of you have seen how people are mobile in San Diego. Very few areas where they don't go out of their own immediate area, and whether they take it out of roads or freeways or public transit, they're going outside of a very narrow jurisdiction. And if we lose regional mobility and start to break this down into little items, we're going to have, we will have done a serious disservice, I think, in the future of this whole family. Most of you, I'm preaching to the choir here, but I think there are people who don't have an appreciation of that. We have assembly members who are always questioning things. MTS, we heard, oh my gosh, they're not investing in the South Bay and improvements. To spend $800 million redoing all of this. There are things that you know, that those of you who are active, you know what's going on. So I think if we could, I don't know, John, if that would be proper under the agenda item, but.
You have this today agendized as discussion of possible action, and so long as it mainly relates to the topic of conversation.
Well, I'd like to, with your permission, we'll just ask our executive director to take some steps to see what augmentation might be needed in terms of our efforts, and we'll come back to you.
Mr. Chairman, if I might just be able to add, you know, legislative cycle will run through September, so, but sometimes the intensity varies, you know, depending on the success of the bill. So I think with your direction, between now and the end of the fiscal year, again, we would try to augment the services of our advocates over there so that there's people that are, you know, dedicated and focused on our issue. And then, you know, if we see that we need more beyond that, well, then we would then come back to you through a budget amendment for the next year if we see, you know, that we need to do more. But I think
you said the current fiscal year.
I think within the current fiscal year, with your direction, we can go make that happen within the contingency provisions that we have in our current budget that would require budget action, because we had to get through at least June, right? And then from July, then we could come back to you if we need more.
Yeah, and I think it's important to get on these things as early as possible within the legislative cycle. Because I know all too often I've seen where legislation moves forward, and then you talk with the legislator down the road, and they already say, well, you know, if I'd have known this earlier, I could have changed it, but now the ball's already rolling and I can't do anything about it. You know, it's that type of an attitude. So I think the more information, and that's what this is. I mean, we're not trying to persuade people, you know, with anything besides what is truthful information. And the more that we get out there, the better. The earlier, the better.
Always the challenge with district-only bills is that the people in legislature that ultimately are gonna vote for this aren't from the district only, right? So you'll have an assembly member or a senator from San Mateo County, one from Butte County, or, you know, Sacramento, other places around the state, because that's how the legislature's made up. So our experience in the past is that, you know, being able to educate legislators beyond your own can be pretty important, because they just don't know enough, right? They don't spend their time in on this. You knock on their door to try to give them information, then, you know, they're going to vote with
Also relates a little bit to telling our story of what has been success in San Diego over the last several years as a region. So we got to tell our story because it's factual. It's factual. It's good information. So.
If I had any of you 10 bills a day that you were going to try to be informed of, I got a feeling.
Yeah.
Early in the first week, you'd start to get fatigued.
I have a question on Mr. Gloria's bill. Initially, it sounds like a good thing to, you know, maybe go to sub-regional, but how does that affect then? What I'd like to hear is maybe, or get from maybe staff, is pros and cons on that, because, you know, then it could, you know, then the system isn't working together or not. So I don't know if that's, my gut reaction is yes, let's go for it so we can get some highways in North County. But the, but yeah, you know, is that? I guess I'd like to. There's always unintended consequence, and maybe there's some pros and cons on that that sub-regional before I guess I don't know if this body's taking a position or not.
We can bring those back. Just like I think, like everything, there's pluses and minuses to stuff. And the one thing we would share in our conversation with Todd is that right now this is a statewide effort, so it would not just be about San Diego, but it would allow. And Mayor, I think one of the benefits for those statewide pieces is that then you start hearing from all the different statewide pieces in terms of how they think that will affect them. So we can come back with our assessment, but we'll also learn a lot, I think, from just monitoring what.
I think I just want to make sure we get that information, and is it? I don't even know if it's even feasible to ask Mr. Gloria that, you know, if the state changes their thresholds, that Sandag's thresholds could mirror that as far as getting these passed. If that could be part of his bill or not, I don't know if that's a worthy thing or not, but if that would have, you know, kids were not under that umbrella, it sounds like possibly if that could go into his bill.
Explore that.
One of the bills that I'm really interested in is the ACA 4, because we need more infrastructure funding as well as affordable housing in San Diego. We're in a deficit in affordable housing, so this would be my interest. Matter of fact, we're going to do a special council meeting in the summer regarding housing affordability in the city of San Diego, so this would be hugely important for the city of San Diego if we can pursue this and make sure that this is followed, and make sure that it goes through as what it says, you know, funding infrastructure as well as affordable housing.
We'll definitely make sure it stays on our list, not high at the end.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? I don't know if we need to take an action.
It's always direction.
Are you looking to give have the executive director exercise the authority that he already has under board policies, or if then, no?
I think if I heard him correctly.
I think between now and the end of the year, we can make it work. That's what I just get the sense if that's the direction you want, we'll go make that happen.
Okay. If that's the case, if we complete everything on the agenda, we'll have 30 seconds before the next meeting starts.
It was a longer thing.
Thank you all.